There are moments that completely divide your life into a distinct before and after. For me, that line was drawn in the dim lighting of a department store security office on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The head of loss prevention had quietly flagged me down, his expression carrying a heavy mixture of pity and reluctance that immediately made my chest tighten with unnameable dread. I had just paid for our weekly groceries while my wife of nearly 2 decades stepped away to answer a supposedly urgent call. I followed the guard into the back room, my boots heavy against the linoleum, entirely unprepared for the digital footage playing across the flickering monitor screen. My name is Garrett Vance, and for 17 years, I believed that a solid marriage was built on absolute trust and giving your partner total privacy. But staring at that surveillance feed, I watched the mother of my 2 children pressed against a corridor wall, her face bright with a radiant smile I had not seen in years. She was twirling her hair and whispering into her phone, her voice bleeding through the cheap audio feed as she laughed about how incredibly oblivious I was. She promised the person on the other end that she would handle me soon, leaving me standing in the dark room with a cold nausea spreading behind my ribs. Before I transitioned into commercial contracting, I spent a decade working as a tactical intelligence officer for the military, a job where survival depended on analyzing anomalies and suppressing emotional reactions. That training took over instantly, allowing me to walk back to the car with steady hands and a perfectly calm demeanor. When my wife returned to the passenger seat, glowing with artificial warmth and claiming the call was just a minor issue with the kids' school, I simply nodded and kissed her cheek. She had absolutely no idea that I had just initiated a silent countdown, choosing to observe her every move rather than exploding in useless rage. Over the next few days, the inconsistencies in her daily routine multiplied until they were impossible to ignore. There was a sudden influx of mysterious evening charity meetings, a brand new designer gym bag that remained locked, and a subtle trace of expensive masculine cologne lingering on her clothes. I spent my late nights lying completely motionless beside her in the dark, memorizing the anxious pattern of her breathing and watching her clutch her phone beneath her pillow like a prized possession. Instead of demanding answers, I quietly started a digital ledger, documenting every single timeline gap and behavioral shift with clinical precision. To uncover the full truth, I reached out to a former military colleague who now specialized in high-level digital forensics and data recovery. Within 48 hours, he bypassed the encryption on her cloud backups, presenting me with a mountain of deleted text exchanges, intimate voice notes, and a devastating photograph. The image was captured just 12 minutes after I had paid for our groceries on that fateful Tuesday afternoon. It showed my wife standing near the dressing rooms with a man, their fingers barely brushing, but it was her relaxed, carefree expression that truly broke my heart. The emotional devastation of betrayal does not arrive with cinematic explosions, but rather through a freezing, silent realization that your entire reality has been carefully manufactured. I chose not to confront her immediately, opting instead to upgrade my strategy by retaining an aggressive family law attorney who specialized in asset insulation. We quietly opened a legal case file and mapped out a comprehensive timeline of her activities. Next, I consulted our private financial planner to investigate whether any joint marital funds were being diverted under the radar, discovering that she had been systematically channeling money into a secret corporate account. The fraudulent corporate entity was registered under an acronym that perfectly matched the initials of her companion, confirming that her deception was incredibly calculated. I signed the necessary paperwork without a single trace of hesitation, effectively freezing our combined bank accounts and legally securing our primary residence through a specialized paternal protection clause. Because my own father had co-signed the original property loan years ago, the deed was entirely shielded from her reach. She remained completely oblivious to the fact that her safety net was gone, believing we were simply attending a business meeting 3 days later. I arranged for us to meet in a neutral, professional conference room at a downtown office suite, inviting both my wife and her associate under completely false pretenses. She believed we were securing a major commercial investor, while he arrived under the impression that we were discussing a lucrative regional expansion plan. When they walked in together, their physical proximity radiated an undeniable familiarity that vanished the moment they saw me standing alone at the table. Her face drained of all color instantly, and her companion froze near the doorway like an amateur soldier caught completely exposed in an open field. I did not scream or slam my hands against the table, choosing instead to calmly slide a thick manila envelope across the polished wood surface. Inside were duplicate copies of her banking records, intercepted text messages, explicit photos, and the state filing documents for their hidden corporate entity. She began to tremble, whispering that she could explain everything, while her companion tried to bluster about his legal rights and how I had no authority to ambush them. I offered a short, humorless laugh, informing them that the marriage was officially over, the house was locked down, and their fraud was being reported. The situation escalated quickly when my older sister, Nora, a formidable corporate litigator with zero tolerance for manipulation, flew into town to manage the fallout. Nora understood that my wife would immediately try to twist the narrative among our mutual friends, so we preemptively distributed the certified documentation to our entire social circle, while my wife sent out desperate, vague messages about growing apart and emotional distance. The undeniable truth had already arrived ahead of her. One of our closest neighbors called me in out shock, stating that my wife had completely destroyed her own reputation within a matter of hours. By Friday afternoon, Nora and my local council secured emergency family court orders, establishing strict asset protection boundaries and temporary custody frameworks to keep the children entirely insulated from the chaos. That evening, my wife arrived at the family home only to discover the deadbolts had been replaced, the alarm codes updated, and a formal legal notice attached to the front door. Our exterior security cameras captured her weeping into her hands on the porch for nearly 10 minutes, completely unaware that this footage would soon be forwarded directly to the executive board of her medical employer. Her corporate employer maintained a strict ethical conduct policy regarding financial integrity, and I possessed undeniable proof that she had used her corporate travel card to fund their private weekend getaways. When Human Resources initiated an emergency investigation, she desperately claimed I was acting out of pure marital malice, but corporate policy prioritizes cold evidence over emotional defense. She was placed on immediate, unpaid professional suspension pending a full forensic audit of her expense reports. That night, she left a frantic, 6-minute voicemail that shifted violently from desperate begging to toxic, unbridled anger. I chose not to reply to her messages, focusing entirely on my children as we ordered food and watched a movie in a peaceful house that finally felt stable. The following morning, Nora presented me with a final investigative folder containing public records from 3 different states regarding her companion's hidden background. The documents revealed a disturbing history of restraining orders, domestic coercion, and financial exploitation filed by a vulnerable woman several years prior. Realizing this individual was an active predator, I forwarded the verified public court links directly to her former employer's Human Resources Department. Within 48 hours, her temporary suspension was upgraded to a permanent termination because she had introduced a significant liability into a secure corporate environment. Her companion attempted to initiate a private meeting to gauge my psychological state, but I ignored his messages and had a security contact serve him with a formal cease and desist order. The final chapter concluded at a small neighborhood diner where my wife and I had once happily discussed the future names of our children over morning coffee. She sat across from me without any makeup or jewelry, looking entirely depleted. She handed me a fading photograph from our wedding day, weeping quietly as she asked if I could ever find it in my heart to forgive her. I carefully placed the old picture into my coat pocket and told her that I had already forgiven her, because that was the only way I could truly let go of the pain. I walked out of the diner without looking back, stepping into my car and driving home to the beautiful reality of my children. I realized that the true measure of a man is not how he suffers a betrayal, but how cleanly he rebuilds from the ash.